May ended at some point, I think, so I'm legally obligated to tell you about what games I played during it. Let's go. Most of my time throughout the month was spent playing Elden Ring Nightreign, as I got sent an early review code because I'm friends with Iron Pineapple. And if I'm being honest, I still am having troubles figuring out how I fully feel about the game. There are just so many problems with it, but I don't know that I really care about most of them. What I can pretty confidently say is that if you're playing in a call with friends, especially friends who are good at Elden Ring, it is an utter blast. Base Elden Ring is just a really good game, and as this pretty much takes everything in it, slaps on a little bit of new paint, and remixes it all into bite-sized expeditions, there is a lot to enjoy here. Each run consists of 3 days. During 2 of them, you explore Limveld, trying to get as powerful as possible, and on the 3rd, you fight one of 8 Night Lords. As a big Ravenswatch fan, I really love the timed aspect of it, as figuring out what route to take and how to defeat enemies as quickly as possible adds a nice layer of tension and rewards good decision making. It also forces you to be as scrappy as possible. Where it is super easy to ignore items in the base game, here they can end up saving you tons and tons of time, and turn the tide of major fights in your favor. Furthermore, unlike base Elden Ring, you don't really have the luxury of sticking with one weapon or kind of spell. You are far more at the mercy of whatever drops in front of you, which is great, as there are so many cool weapons and spells in the game that I imagine a lot of players have never really seen or used before because of how the base game kind of incentivizes sticking to whatever you have upgraded the most. It was nice to be pushed to try something other than the gut sword, even though I did miss it. And given that each expedition only takes around 40 minutes, if you end up with a weapon you don't really vibe with, in the next run you'll most likely have something far different. This is especially true if you switch classes between runs, each of which feels distinctly different from the others, not just in terms of stats and appearance, but also in terms of unique abilities and ultimate moves. My 2 favorites have been Wilder and Iron Eye, largely as they have a lot of cool movement potential. It feels amazing to close the distance with enemies super quickly to get in some extra damage or hit them with the Hunter's Mark. Again, while base Elden Ring does provide plenty of larval tiers that allow you to change up your character, I very rarely found myself doing that, as it is a bit of a hassle. But Nightreign provided a perfect opportunity to try out a ton of different kinds of characters and get a fuller sense of the combat options without having to worry about the bigger picture. I have played a ton of Elden Ring, but honestly I feel like I have learned more about the combat from playing Nightreign than I ever did from the base game, simply because it is so easy to try different types of characters and be exposed to all sorts of weapons. Now all of that stuff is great, but where it truly shines is with the Night Lords. Each one is a blast to fight. It is cool to see FromSoft cook up bosses explicitly made for co-op. Where in the base game you always go in guns blazing, here a ton of communication is required to keep everyone alive and stun the bosses at the right time to do tons of damage and stop them from using certain attacks. There is something about this slate of bosses that honestly reminded me of the bosses from Demon Souls, and I say that lovingly. None of them are completely centered around a single gimmick like those are, but each do have some interesting aspect to interact with and figure out, making them engaging in multiple ways. It sort of melds the creativity found in the old days with the high-paced action of newer entries, and I think they created something really special here. With all of that said, there are aspects to this game that are just kind of baffling. Like, there are character quests, but only one player can do them on any given run, so it can take forever to actually do them, which is kind of frustrating as the rewards you get from them are the coolest in the game. Also, they pull a few bosses from previous Souls games, but frankly the pool of them is so tiny that it kind of begs the question of why include them at all. Like, to be clear, they are cool, but I wish there were way more of them, and that they picked some better ones. I heard that the director didn't want to step too much on the lore of the Dark Souls series by bringing in certain bosses, but like, what are we doing here? If you're gonna tear open the extended universe a little bit, who cares if you tear it open a lot? Ornstein and Smo would have gone so hard in this game, and in general, a bigger pool of bosses from older games would have made night fights so much more exciting. I do understand that repurposing these assets is not as easy as copying and pasting them, but I think it would have been worth it to take the time to add more of them. Furthermore, most weapons have some sort of status buff on them that affects you whether you're using it or not. It'll be stuff like doing more damage on jump attacks or while two-handing a weapon. So when grabbing stuff, you not only have to look at what you want to use, but also what passives might be good for your build. I don't know that this is an inherently bad system, as it does incentivize you to have a varied arsenal of weapons even if they don't play into your character type, but it is kind of messy, and in a game that is all about speed, it can feel annoying to be forced into doing so much item management. It is something you eventually get used to, but it largely feels like an unnecessary layer that doesn't add all that much. What might be the biggest issue is that while the map is always a little different from run to run, it does mostly come down to memorizing how to tackle various points of interest as well as the shifting earths to get as many rewards as possible. In some ways this is pretty cool as you get a weird sort of mastery of the game, but in others it can get pretty repetitive. While the shifting earths bring some variety, after experiencing each one once or twice, they feel the same every time after. It becomes less about dealing with a new wrinkle and more about following the optimal path as their layouts are static. In turn, this makes it so decision making around routing is really only a day one thing, as your second day is pretty much predetermined by whatever shifting earth you get. And honestly, on day one, you probably should just be going to the castle in the middle because that is what is going to get you the most rewards and runes. Mix that with the fact that most upgrades you get are passive ones that don't impact your playstyle all that much, and Nightreign kinda fails at being a roguelite in every meaningful way. Once you clear all the Night Lords, there isn't much new to do. Sure, you can go and finish all the character quests, but the game really needed some sort of more meaningful endgame. Most roguelites practically start once you beat the final boss for the first time, so it is weird that Nightreign doesn't do all that much to incentivize players to keep playing. It took me about 15 hours to beat all the bosses, and that was with replaying a handful of them, but I'm sure your mileage will vary. I'm willing to admit that the Iron Pineapple difference is real, and as I played through a lot of it with him, I'm sure I had an easier time than the average person will. Now, despite the fact that it is pretty bad at being an actual roguelike, I still want to play it even after rolling credits. In fact, at this point, I've put in way more hours since beating it. I was playing some with Pine and Jacob Geller, and Jacob made the point that it almost felt more like a speedrunning game than a roguelite, and I think that observation is pretty spot on. You not only have to learn how to quickly come up with routes and beat bosses as efficiently as possible, but you also have to figure out proper menuing in order to not waste time figuring out what's in your inventory and what you should or shouldn't keep. Your brain will almost always be split between your character's actual movement and sorting through your stuff or checking the map. It ends up calling for a skill set that is a lot different than what you'd expect from Elden Ring or a roguelite. I've come to enjoy the speedrun nature of it, and while the game lacks variety in most ways, there is enough variety between the characters to keep things fresh. And it isn't just about the character you play as. Different party comps can drastically change your approach to combat and your effectiveness, and finding good team builds is a blast. Also, playing with different people changes things up dramatically. Anyone can win in a lobby with Pine and Ouroboros, but leading a team to victory who has never played before is an entirely different experience. I've really loved playing with different groups of people of all skill levels to both carry and be carried. So yeah, Nightreign is a messy game that is hard not to feel a bit disappointed by in terms of the amount of content it has. There is so much missed potential here, and it seems like with a handful of changes, some of which could theoretically be patched in, it could have been a much better game. However, the core of it is an utter blast, and as so many of my friends are interested in playing it, I imagine I will keep hopping into Limveld until I no longer can find a group who wants to jump in with me. Or, now that I've talked about it in a video, all the energy I felt toward the game will dissipate and I will lose all motivation to keep playing and never touch it again. Who knows? Along with that, I also played some Lethal Company for the first time. Back when it initially blew up, it seemed super interesting, but my schedule is so limited that it was hard for me to coordinate playing games with other people, but now that my life has a bit more flexibility, I figured it was time to give it a shot, and it's really fun, or at least it's really funny. The core loop of exploring each area to gather items to bring back to your ship and then sell so that you can get new items that will help you better explore and handle the various horrors you'll come across is engaging enough. But the part that makes it worth playing is the comedy of it all. Characters move in a slapstick fashion, communication is proximity based, causing tons of fun interactions, and the tension that comes from monsters being around any corner creates countless moments of panic that are always hilarious to witness. While the actual gameplay gameplay doesn't have that much to it, it being so simplistic is what allows the best moments to come about. It is a playground that facilitates chaotic encounters for you and your friends to experience. The loop of trying to meet the profit quota creates some nice tension and feels good to overcome, although that relief is short-lived as there's always a newer, higher quota to reach. But honestly, failure is what makes the game tick. Seeing your teammate get overtaken by a monster and leaving them behind so you don't get got too, or forgetting to sell enough items to actually meet the quota despite having a huge surplus of stuff, these are the moments you remember. Frankly, at least in my experience, the better a run goes, the less fun it tends to be. Now, because of that, as well as there not being any sort of endpoint to really work toward, I can't imagine that I will play the game a ton. I definitely want to see a few other planets and experiment with more of the items, but for me at least, I think it works better as a game that me and my friends are bad at and jump into occasionally for a few laughs and a bit of mayhem, instead of something that I actively try to get good at. The rest of the games I'm going to talk about are ones that I talked about in my main channel video about indie games you probably haven't played. I didn't play all of these in May, but A, I didn't want to release them in previous videos as to not spoil everything that would be on the list, and B, it feels simpler to just touch on them quickly here in one video as I've already talked somewhat extensively about them on the main channel. So first up was Snow Ultimate Freeriding, which is an arcade-style skiing game where you're placed on a procedurally generated mountain and ski or snowboard down it. There are a few different modes, but in the main one you get points for doing tricks and try to get as high of a score as possible. I find it very relaxing to play, and it has just enough depth to keep things mechanically interesting. Then there was Basilisk 2000, a mystery title where you're exploring the unreleased spiritual successor to the unreleased SNES game Basilisk. It is the kind of weird framing device that I love. It uses a wrapper program in Unity that lets you examine the levels that were finished and try to make sense of what the game was about and why it shut down. It's a super creative idea that certainly can be pretty opaque at times, so if you're averse to getting super in the weeds, it might not be for you, but it is the kind of weird game that I live for. After that was Xanthiom 0, a small Metroidvania with a rad weapon system where you can customize pieces of your blaster to create all sorts of cool weapon combinations. It's really cool, and I found myself testing a bunch of stuff out to see what would best fit with my playstyle, and also I switched stuff up when I came across certain enemies in order to have a competitive advantage. It's a tightly designed game where every reward feels interesting. And lastly, I played Islets. I talked about Shippo on this channel a while back and mentioned how I was excited to play more games from Kyle Thompson, and yeah, this one was a pleasure too. It expands on the foundation of Shippo by introducing combat to the mix, which I found to be pretty solid. The boss fights especially were a lot of fun. It's a cute and funny time that just feels really smooth to play. If you want some more thoughts on all of these games, check out the video on the main channel. Anyway, that is it. I will see you in the next one unless I decide to stop doing this. Bye.